to Sewing with Nancy with your host, Nancy Zeman. This educational videotape is being brought to you by FOF, the largest European producer of sewing machines. FOF, simply the best. By Pellon, the first name in interfacing and craft materials and the first choice of home sewers for professional results. Pellon, products by Freudenberg. By Ginger, a tradition of quality in scissors and shears for home, classroom, and industry. Ginger scissors and shears are the choice of professionals. The McCall Pattern Company, the most fashionable name in contemporary home sewing patterns and publishers of McCall's Patterns, Sewing's fashion magazine. And by Nancy's Notions catalog, featuring specialty sewing books and unique, hard-to-find sewing notions and supplies.
Welcome to Sewing with Nancy. We have some special guests today. I have a king, a princess, a ghost, a skeleton, and some clowns. Yes, it's sewing for Halloween. We're going to sew scary, sew fun. This is kind of a fun treatment. It gets everyone in the mood, whether for Halloween or for a masquerade. Here's our first guest. Today we're sewing scary, sewing spooky costumes, ghosts and goblins, or skeletons. Not only will I be showing you quick sewing techniques, but I'll be pointing out ways to sew safety into the costumes. When your little trick-or-treater walks through your neighborhood on Halloween night, you want your child or grandchild to be visible. We've added reflective tape to our ghost costume that reflects headlights. Our skeleton outfit looks like a time-consuming project, but with a little ingenuity, you'll see that the bones can be pressed on in minutes. Our ghost and skeleton are ready for some treats, and I'll treat you with a few sewing tricks. Hope they didn't scare you away. We'll start sewing now. Several years ago, when my son asked me to make a Halloween skeleton costume, I thought, oh no, look at all the applique involved. And then I thought, we're going to do this the easy way. That's to use fusible interfacing as the bones or the skeleton. Rather than cutting out of the pattern just a woven fabric and then appliquing it into place, this is cut out of a fusible weight. Just simply place it over the area that it requires, cover it with a press cloth and press, and there's your applique. Now, not a very durable one, but he wore it for a couple Halloweens, played with it as well, and it really works out quite efficiently. Another easy application for Halloween was a little ghost costume that we showed you. We had the reflective tape along the hood section. This tape can be purchased or by a strip or in yardage sections. Check your local fabric store, and I'll show you what it looks like. The taping has a backing that can be just peeled right off, and this one falls off rather easily. And then we'll just simply show you about pressing it onto a sheet. Cover it again with a press cloth and initially press the adhesive side to the fabric, and the heat of the iron will bond it into place. So the first step is really just a lot of pressing. After letting it dry the appropriate time, then you'll be able to just peel off the backing and you'll see the safety reflective tape appearing. A great way to make your Halloween costume safe. Halloween gets more people excited about sewing than any other event or occasion during the entire year. For fabric stores, Halloween is what gets most of us in the stores. Sewers and non-sewers alike. Don't worry, I'll give sewing tips for novices too. Halloween is not just for kids. Our king had a masquerade to attend, and what better way to have a one-of-a-kind costume than to make it? The pattern provides all the detail, you provide the talent. Our princess had fun choosing her fabric. Notice that the robe has metallic sleeve lining. What fun! I'll have some quick ideas for making this costume. Maybe you'll even like to make one for yourself. We're going to start with our princess outfit and work with the vest. For those of you who are serger owners and haven't really tried working with decorative threads, this is a perfect opportunity to try it out. We used wrong side together construction and serged the wrong sides together with decorative thread or ribbon. It's a lot faster to sew, and if you would like to experiment with specialty threads, this is an opportune time. On the serger, in the right needle, or in the needle, I have just a metallic thread, and both loopers have a metallic ribbon or yarn. You could really choose anything that you'd like, but this is what we used. We met the wrong sides of the lining and the fashion fabric together. Sometimes when making Halloween costumes, you don't spend a lot of money on costumes. I wouldn't either. And these two fabrics were really slipping and sliding and difficult to serge together. So to hold them temporarily together, one method would be to just spray a little fabric adhesive. Sometimes the adhesive that's ozone friendly that you use for putting your pattern pieces on the fabric, just press it together and it sticks long enough for you to serge it together. Or if you have really slippery fabric, what we did on this sample is to bond the fabrics together with a fusible web. Now just serge around the edges, and first of all, of course, check it on a scrap to make sure that you have the right tension settings. We've lengthened the stitch, made a wide serger bite. We're serging off 5/8 of an inch and just serge around the edges. Really can't beat this for speed. And then you can, of course, as I mentioned earlier, kind of test this out how you'd like to use this for some more practical projects. And here we have the serged edge around the little vest area, kind of fun to work with. And then to finish this off, we simply just added some sew-on jewels. Be sure that you sew these on in case your children will play with them, have them in their dress-up box. On our princess and king outfit, we had a lot of need to gather, and you'll find gathering essential on many Halloween costumes. I'll show you some tricks of gathering with a serger as well as a conventional machine. This is a new technique that was recently passed along to me, and I think it's rather fun, of having adjustable gathers at the serger. I've used different colors of thread just to show you more clearly, having the needle thread one color and the looper is a different color, but of course you'll probably have all the same color on your machine. To do this, first of all, loosen the needle threads to all the way, to nothing. And now we're going to remove the threads from the stitch finger of the serger. Simply do this by pulling the stitch finger's threads forward, or the needle thread forward, loosening the tension on it, and then pulling the chain. That will remove the threads from the stitch finger. I'm just going to loosen these just a little bit more and pull out the threads. You can see I have all the threads are disengaged from the chain. They're not chained together. Clip off the chain. And now pull the needle threads. Now the needle threads will pull very easily because the tension is at 0. And pull them as long as you need it. If you needed to gather a yard, pull the two threads a yard length. That's the key of doing this. Now put the tension back to its normal setting. Now the threads are tight. To serge, we're simply going to place the fabric underneath the presser foot, lower the presser foot, and notice that I have the threads guiding them to the left of the blade. I do not want to obviously cut the threads. I'm just going to serge over them. Just serge and serge. Now I'm going to cut the chain, and you'll find that you can adjust these threads. This is a lot of fun. We can make them larger or narrower, and we do not have to worry about the threads unhooking because they're encased in the seam in the beginning. Use this same technique at your conventional machine. Place the fabric underneath the presser foot, lower the foot, and take one stitch by hand. Then you can pull up the bobbin thread by pulling at the top thread as you see this loop. Pull the bobbin and top thread as long as you need. Twist these two threads together and zigzag over the threads. Now you can adjust the threads just by simply pulling the top and bobbin thread. Our king had a real authentic type of costume down to his striped shorts. And when making these, to make them poofy, you'll see that there are gathers at the leg opening, but inside the fabric we have it backed with a crisp sew-in interfacing, the real crisp stuff that you don't use a lot for garment sewing, more for craft sewing. Cut an underlining, the same pattern pieces for the underlining as the fashion fabric, so that you have a layer of the crisp sew-in interfacing and the fashion fabric. And meet the two together and just sew them together. When sewing in the elastic, this is very stiff and crisp, and it will poof out just the way our king's shorts need to be. Our king also has a very regal crown, and this crown jewel was made with a little gluing and pressing. We mainly used pressing techniques to get the fabric glued to the backing. Use some tag board and cut the pattern piece out of the tag board. Really any type of cardboard would work as long as it is pliable and can move around. Now for the fabric, I had some glitzy fabric here where we've pressed on the transfer web that has the webbing bonded to the paper. We just simply press it to the wrong side of the fabric and follow the manufacturer's instructions for the correct time. We're doing a little shorter time right now. Earlier I fused this piece on and then would simply remove the paper backing, and now the fabric has the webbing attached to it. You might guess what's next, and that's to press the fabric to the front side of the crown. And this will take a little time in clipping. We've already pressed the lower edge into place, and now we'll simply clip to the edges. And what's nice about this, it doesn't have to be just perfectly accurate, but we can press. I'm going to steam base this into place. Just mold this around. After pressing it, add a few jewels, and we have the difficult part of our king's outfit complete. Now a few costumes perfect for little girls. Make-believe, that's what's so fun about Halloween. Our little girls can pretend that they are dancing in the New York Ballet or traveling to a far distant land. One of the most exciting parts of sewing costumes is to have your child help choose the fabric. When sewing make-believe, there aren't any fabric restrictions. In fact, chiffons, metallics, and satins are perfect combinations. Often the remnant tables have perfect finds for your child's costume. Our little ballerina outfit required only sewing the skirt and using tights and a top that our little dancer already owned. Jessica likes her costume so much that it's just not something she wears on Halloween. It's a permanent part of her dress-up box. That's a thought to keep in mind. Dressing up is a great way to pretend. This type of play sparks creativity and imagination. So don't just think that you are sewing a one-time costume. Think of it as a year-round enjoyment. Our ballerina's tutu has a lot of layers of gathers. We have bridal, veiling, and organdy, but notice how these edges really stick up and out. The reason for this is the edges serged with the use of fishing line. Something that you're not going to find at your fabric store, but maybe you'll find in somebody's tackle box. A size 10 to 15 weight fishing line is what you're going to use for serging. We're simply going to serge over the edges. Let me show you why. On a sample, we've just serged the edges with a rolled edge stitch, and okay, that's the way it normally looks, but let me show you the more predominant and precise ruffled edges that you'll have by having the stiffness added in this area. At my machine, I have the rolled edge stitch set up according to my sewing machine or serger instructions, and in the lower looper, I've used the texturized type woolly nylon thread that isn't spun so it fills out the edge, and a normal serger thread in the needle. If you have this available with your serger, why not use a beading foot or a piping foot? It has a little groove in the end, allowing you to lay the beading. Here we're going to lay the fishing line right in the foot, and I'll show you how to do this. So the fabric we're going to sew on is just bridal veiling. Lower the presser foot and sew a few stitches, and then get out the fishing line. Now you may think, well, I can only use this for ballerina tutus. Well, no, you can also use it for ruffles on garments, evening gowns where you'd like predominant ruffles to be seen. So it has some other variations. I think it's kind of a fun thought. And this fishing line, transparent as it is, it's just laying in this little trough of the beading foot. Or if you didn't have that, just place it next to the blade. Serge over the edge, and presto, a nice predominant edge. On many of our Halloween costumes, we found areas that just needed partial gathers, as on this little ballerina top or on the harem top. Rather than gathering over threads or using the serger, you can serge, or stitch, I should say, over clear elastic. We found this very helpful. Clear elastic, you recall, is the lightweight, transparent type of elastic that has great stretch, and if you stitch through it, it doesn't lose its elasticity. Cut the elastic longer than you need and mark the finished length or the finished size right on the elastic. We've used a washable marking pen, or here so it would show a little bit more clearly, a ballpoint pen. Don't do that at home. Then pin it to the area that's to be gathered. Again, leave tails at each end so that you have something to hold on to when sewing. Either with a straight stitch or with a zigzag, sew over the elastic. And since this is a small area, I'm just going to sew over the elastic, remembering to stretch the elastic to meet the section. That's all there's to it. This probably is the fastest way to gather, especially for these small little areas. Now you can see how easily this adjusts and has been gathered, and I think it's kind of a nice look. If you'd also like to use it within the garment to gather a whole section, again, just zigzag or gather over an area, again leaving tails at the end so you have something to hold on to. Another fast way of gathering for both Halloween costume and conventional sewing. The world loves a clown, happy or sad, big or small. Wouldn't we all like to be a clown for just one day? Our little clowns have costumes that can slip right over street clothes or even jackets. Great Halloween costumes for those of us who live in cooler climates. Keep the temperature outside in mind when planning a costume. Sometimes just sewing a size larger will allow the costume to fit over layers of clothes. When sewing this costume, you can clown around with fabric. With this costume, anything goes. Search your fabric box for fun combinations. The wilder, the better. Our clown costumes were put together rather quickly. We used a serge or gathering technique that I demonstrated earlier. For time-saving closures, I'll show you a speedy zipper, hook and loop tape closing, and an elastic casing that gives great results. On our clown outfits, we had elastic casings at the wrist and ankle. And here's some fast ways of putting in casings. Rather than sewing the seam and then putting in the casing, we like to use a flat construction. Put the elastic in before sewing the side seam. And then using the lightweight bias cut tricot that comes on a roll that's usually used to finish seam allowances, use this as a casing, cutting it to the correct length, putting it on the wrong side of the fabric. Now, straight stitch this into place, stitching along one side of the casing. You can stitch close to this because it will not ravel. Now for your elastic, don't cut the elastic just yet. We'll cut a little bit later, but place the elastic underneath the casing and just sandwich the casing on top of it. We're really not going to sew into it. We're just going to encase it, since it is a casing, and sew along the sides. You can make it tight or loose. Here we're giving it a little give, just sewing along the side. After encasing the elastic, then try it around your child's wrist or ankle and pin one end, pull the elastic, one more time, pull the elastic to get it to the correct length. To see how it fits, if you'd like it tighter or looser, simply adjust it. Then sew the side seam. It's nice and soft next to the skin, as you can see, easy to put in. Speaking of an easy insertion, now for a zipper. In our clown costumes we had zippers, and some of you who don't sew a lot, who make Halloween costumes, may find, oh, a zipper. Well, here's an idea. At my ironing board I have the zipper with a strip of the fusible bond attached. And I just cut a narrow little 1/8 of an inch strip. Remember, this has a paper backing on a webbing, and just press it to the right side of the zipper along the zipper tape. Make sure that that zipper pull is visible because that's the side you'd like it on. And on each side, then simply pull away the paper backing. This will have the bonding. Now this is not going to be the permanent stitching. This is just temporary. Now place it on the wrong side of the zipper area that has already been basted closed, machine basted closed, and press it, temporarily holding it into place. I found that people who have a phobia about putting on zippers find that everything moves on them too much. This way, everything will be held snugly and securely. Then use some transparent tape, the type you have at your desk, to mark a stitching line and top stitch along each side up and down the zipper. That will be one of the fastest ways of putting in a zipper, and give that a try. You might want to try it in a garment next time. Another type of closure that is fast is to use hook and loop tape, great for children's costumes. Here we have the hook and loop tape attached in the zipper area rather than using a zipper, another alternative. On this sample I have the seam allowance pressed under on one side and not on the other. You can see the closure. Then just sew one side with the hook tape, the other side with the loop tape, and a fast closure, a nice zipper alternative. Next we'll review some of our techniques. In today's first session of Sewing for Halloween, we had a lot of costumes for kids. But this isn't just for children. If you have a masquerade or a costume party, make something for yourself. If you have a serger and you haven't quite experimented with all the threads and needles and stitches that are available to you, keep in mind sewing a specialty costume might be just the place to try it out. You can sew with lots of glitzy thread and ribbon if you'd like. It'd be a fun way to test out your settings and your different stitches. Next time we'll be working with some additional Halloween costumes, some wild animals to begin with. Welcome to Sewing Scary, Sewing Fun. That's right, we're on Halloween again, and today we have some fun sewing techniques. Let's start off with some wild guys. Who says wild animals must stay outdoors? This animal costume pattern collection lets your child or grandkid have great imaginative fun. If being a cowardly or courageous lion is your child's fantasy, I'll pass along a few fake fur sewing techniques that will make sewing this costume only a 2-evening project. Or how about a sweet-smelling skunk? Use sweatshirt fleece, an interlock knit, or even a broadcloth for the body, and add yarn fringe for that telltale stripe. This is a fun costume to create, especially with the yarn fringe idea. Not to be forgotten, our little piglet. Here you wouldn't have to sew the entire costume, buy a pink sleeper or pajamas, and only sew a fleece mask and hooves. That's my kind of Halloween sewing. Now I'd like to show you how to sew these scary but fun costumes. Let's start with a lion costume and some techniques on working with fake fur. There are different types of fake fur available. The type that we have for this sample is just a very short nap. You can see as I'm brushing this fur that really it's only about a 1/2 inch long. There are other types of fake fur that have a much greater nap, where it's about 3/4 inch, or even up to 1 inch long. This is really animal-like. But again, we're being kind to the animals and using the fake type. With both furs, you want the nap to brush down, like you're petting a cat, going down the length of the body. That's the way we're going to cut the costumes out, with the nap going down. There's some cutting guidelines because we can't treat this just like a normal fabric because of the shedding or the clipping of the fur. First of all, seam allowances. Later we're going to sew with 1/4 inch seam allowances, so to account for that, we have trimmed the seam allowances down to just a 1/4 inch, trimming away 3/8 inch in each seam allowance. Now notice I'm not folding this in half and cutting double. I have a single layer of fabric, and this is the wrong side of the fabric that you're looking at. The grain line of the arrow is parallel to the cut edge, or the selvage, excuse me. The grain line is parallel to the selvage of the fabric. And as I mentioned, we're going to cut this single layer, so trace around the pattern piece, marking the cutting line right on the back side. Now this is a knit back side, as most fake furs do. And if you'd like, you can even mark the dots, as I've done earlier, of the endings of the darts. I'll darken these a little bit. And if you'd like, you could even draw the stitching lines on here. Now after you've done one, this mask piece or hood piece of the line calls for cut 2. Flip this the other way. Now we have backed our pattern with a fusible interfacing to give it a little bit of greater support, but then you simply do the same manner of tracing around this edge, and this piece is taken care of. If your other pattern pieces have folds on them, or if any of them have a fold, cut a duplicate pattern and pin the two together so that you have one piece. Remember, we're cutting a single layer, not folding the fabric in half as we so often do with traditional fabric. After you've marked all of your pattern pieces on the back of the fabric, then it's time to do the cutting. And here's where you can get a real mess if you don't follow one basic rule, and that is just to cut the backing. It's a knit backing, and you're going to use the tip of your scissors. You're not going to take big strides. Just get it going and just cut only the back. And use that scissors, so make sure that it's sharpened at this point. But just by cutting the backing, sliding the scissor point along, you'll not be cutting the fur. It'll make your sewing area a lot cleaner. And as I open this up, the hair kind of parts, or fur parts, right at the cutting line. So it makes it nice and neat. Really, there isn't any problem with shedding. Now after you've cut out all of your pattern pieces, we're going to sew these together using some special sewing techniques. I'll show this for you on the short-haired fur as well as on long-haired fur. When sewing fake fur, you have to make sure that you're not going to sew the fur right into the seam, otherwise it will look a little bit unusual. With the shorter fur, it's not going to make quite as much difference, but you can still see that there is a nap. This is only about 1/4 of an inch long. With this sample, the fur hair is quite a bit longer, and the nap really has to have great consideration taken. On the sample, I'm just going to meet right sides together and show you that I'm going to be sewing with the direction of the fur. Here's how the fur brushes down, so I'm going to be sewing in this direction as well. When pinning the fur pieces together, tuck the fur inside between the two layers and use long pins pinning the layers. Just kind of tuck it and pin. You might want to use quilting pins, whatever you'd like, but the longer the better, especially on these long lengths. Now the machine is set up for a zigzag. I have a narrow length. You want the seam to be secure, and a medium width, so that you have 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. And place the fabric underneath the presser foot so that a zig goes in the fabric, the zag goes off the fabric. And zigzag the seam. Now as I'm taking out the pin, I usually keep one in my hand and kind of tuck the fur inside so that I'm not sewing over the fur, just the knit backing. Remember, we trimmed the seam allowances, trimming away 3/8 of an inch so that the zigzag should be fairly close to 1/4 of an inch. Again, this is a costume. It doesn't require just perfect sewing, but if you'd like to apply these techniques to making a fur coat or a jacket later on, this would be a way to go about it. Here's the seam allowance, and when we open it up, you can hardly see where we've done the sewing because we've zigzagged the two areas together. This fabric doesn't ravel, so fake fur can be cut into strips, as we did for the mane of the lion's hood, and just stitched into place and be nice and furry and burly. Now for some accent ideas on a skunk. Our skunk's telltale stripe is made with yarn, and I'll show you how to make this yarn sewn right at the sewing machine. It's easy and a great thing to have your kids help you do. The stripe, or the stripe down the center of the skunk, is about 8 inches wide. We have the hood or the mask type area right here, and this width is 8 inches. So go into your garage or basement and find a cardboard box and cut a strip that's 8 inches wide by about 10 to 12 inches long. You may notice that I have a section cut out of the center. In the center of the 8-inch width, cut a 1-inch piece, or as close to that as you can, and stopping at about 3 to 4 inches from the end. This doesn't have to be precise. However you'd like to make it is fine. But keep this center section and put it back into the cardboard while wrapping the yarn around this. Now as you can see, this doesn't take a lot of ingenuity to wrap this yarn. And this might be a perfect thing for your preschooler or maybe even toddler in some instances to help you wrap the yarn around. You know, making a Halloween costume would be great if you could have a little help and make them feel part of it. Now after you've wrapped the whole thing, I've only wrapped part of it, but I'll assume that you'll wrap the whole thing, slide the yarn down until the opening, until you see the opening section, and I'm just going to slide that little window open. The object now is to stitch down the center of the yarn fringe. Just stitch down the center, and as I'm sewing, I'm going to pull out the cardboard strip. Now keep this in mind. Some of you may make dolls, or maybe we'll make a wig for Halloween, for one of your costumes, and this is a great way of making hair in that instance. We're going to set the machine at a straight stitch, and I'm not sewing on the cardboard, I'm just sewing in the opening. And as I sew, I'm just going to pull the section out just a little bit. This takes just a little bit of time because the yarn is thick and lofty that you have to work with it just a little bit. But without this cardboard pattern piece, it can be kind of a trial. And I'll just work with a little bit more and just keep on sewing. I'm almost done with this section. You would wrap a lot more on here. And now to get the sewing machine out of the cardboard, just simply open it all the way up catch one more strand of yarn here and cut off the threads. Here we have the section sewn, and now we just slide it off. And now it would be ready to insert into the seam. All the fringe has been sewn together. It's ready to go. This is a fun sewing treatment. I know you'll enjoy these next adorable costumes. This is one of my favorite Halloween patterns. All these styles are available in one envelope. Your child has lots of make-believe options. This pattern gives us other options too. There aren't any fabric restrictions. Use broadcloth, fleece, knit, polar fleece, or practically any other fabric. One of the key elements of making the pumpkin, penguin, and mouse is to use a fleece backing to give the costume fullness. I'm certain that you do not plan on spending days to sew costumes, so I'll give you time-saving techniques on underlining the costumes which speed up sewing time. I'll show you how to have as much fun sewing the costumes as your child will have wearing it. If you're going to make a pattern or a costume that has batting or fleece in the inside, as a little pumpkin, mouse, and penguin had, you're going to use batting or fleece on the inside and treating it as an underlining. It's in between the lining and the garment, the fashion fabric I should say, and it's going to be attached or enclosed in the seam allowances. To make it so that all those layers don't shift around, I have some recommendations. First of all, to back the outer fabric, the wrong side of the outer fabric, with fleece or batting. Here I have a fleece sample, and fleece is found in your interfacing section of the fabric store, used for shoulder pads and placemats, and here we're going to use it for Halloween costumes. This particular type of fleece has a fusible backing. It's fusible. The back side is very smooth because of the fusible applied, and the front side is more lofty. Meet wrong sides together, and I have just slightly trimmed away about 1/8 of an inch of the fleece, and then press. This will make it like it's one layer rather than two and prevent a lot of shifting when sewing. Now, if you did not have a fusible fleece, or if you would like to use a quilt batting or something thicker, but yet wanted to keep those layers together without a lot of pinning and hand basting, try another technique that we've used in this series, and that is to use a fabric adhesive and just slightly spray the fabric. Now, this is going to not be permanent. It will just be a temporary adhesive, but hold these layers together long enough for you to sew them together. And this is a great way of attaching a batting or fleece to make everything stay together and not shift while sewing. You can use these same techniques of making three-dimensional quilted sections of your costume. Here our king's shield is quilted. The batting, the fleece, and the lining are all quilted together. And for those of us who are not doing a lot of quilting, we may find this difficult. And I'll show you how to put all of these together. Here's a close-up of our shield, and you can see that it's quilted through all layers. For making a Halloween costume, you do not want to spend a lot of time on this, so this method I'm going to show you will save you that time and frustration. We've used the fleece that's fusible again, and we've put the fusible backing to the lining side, fused it to the lining. In this instance, I wish this fleece were fusible on both sides, but to make it easier, we put the paperback fusible web onto the wrong side of the garment, and then just remove that and sew the two sections together, meeting right sides and sewing around the edge as the pattern indicates. Notice that this is fusible here, and we're going to fuse it to the fleece in just a few minutes. After sewing around all the edges, turning it right side out, I've skipped some steps here, but you know how to do that. Just follow the pattern guide. Here you can see an opening has been left to turn this right side out, and you would sew it closed. Now press all layers together. And this will prevent it from shifting, but it will still have loft. Now, to mark the stitching line, what we have done is to use the original pattern, placed it around the finished garment, meeting the sewing line, and then place tracing paper. And with your tracing wheel, mark the stitching lines. At the sewing machine, you can see that I'm stitching following the sewing line, but there isn't a lot of shifting because all layers are sewn together. When quilting this Halloween costume shield, I'm just following the lines made by the tracing wheel. Because all the layers have been fused together, it's not necessary to pin or hand-baste, and it makes making this part of the Halloween costume really quick and easy. Now for a final finishing detail. On our little mouse costume, we have a tail. We also had a tail in our lion costume. And sometimes to put cording or stuffing in a tail can be a little bit difficult by stuffing the tube with a pencil or something. We've made that a little bit simpler. With right sides together, meet the strips and sew just a narrow seam allowance and sewing one end closed, leaving the other end open. And place it on a Turner cylinder. It's just a nice little cylinder like this. This is a two-part product or notion, and it has a little squiggle end, the part that goes in the middle, and just have it go through the end so it catches the fabric. Just begin the fabric to go through the cylinder. Do not push the whole thing, because if you'd like it stuffed, now you can insert the cording. And as you're pulling this through, the cording catches in. It's kind of miraculous how easily this goes. Just keep pulling and pulling, and when the tail comes out, it's already stuffed. You can use a larger cylinder for a larger tail, and they all work on the same principle and make that finishing touch of your Halloween costume simple. Our next costume pattern is for guys that like action, lots of action. I'm especially fond of the karate outfit. Could it be because my son wore it for Halloween, plus wears it practically every night to bed? If your costume will have a dual role, choose a fabric with washability and wearability. Fleece was my selection. Another costume that can easily play a dual role is boxer silks with a robe. I like the idea of making costumes that serve two purposes. Again, if you would like this robe to be functional after the end of October, fabric selection is real important. Round 'em up cowboys. We like this outfit since only the vest and chaps were sewn. The rest of the costume elements came from Dan's closet. The chaps stay strapped to the leg with strips of elastic, and the fringe accent is made without tedious measuring and marking. Next, I'd like to show you a few techniques from our cowboy costume. Let's take a closer look at our cowboy chaps. The pockets and the stars near the bottom of the chaps are simply fused into place. They're not even stitched on. So you can see these are just even raveling a little bit, but for Halloween costumes and for make-believe, this is perfect. They can't use the pockets, but it's fast sewing, gives a lot of enjoyment. The fringes we also wanted to make fast without having to spend a lot of time on this. Now normally when I sew I spend a little bit more time, but Halloween costumes are another story. To make this fringe you can use felt fabric, broadcloth, gabardine, scraps of whatever you'd like. This fabric is a woven, so it is going to ravel a little bit after wearing, but that will be just fine. If you were working with felt, you could use a single layer, but if working with a woven fabric, why don't you try a double layer? Here we have two layers, or one layer just folded in half and fused together, or you could sew it together, whatever you'd like. Now to fringe it, the alternative would be just to cut with the scissors every so many inches, but so often then you'd cut into the seam allowance. Here's a thought. We have a cutting board, and we've placed the fringe piece on the wrong side of the cutting board, taping just a seam allowance width 5/8 of an inch to the wrong side. Just tape it down periodically so that it holds. Now you can see that the fringe piece is beyond the cutting board. Now wrap it up toward the board. Use your cutting ruler and rotary cutter and just cut strips. Cut the fringe, and you just cut to the point. And this is a fast way. There really isn't any measuring, because this is just for fun. And as you can see, maybe you can apply this technique to another costume that has fringes. I'll just keep going away. Maybe your kids could even help you do this, providing they were old enough to handle the rotary cutter. Now after doing this, just remove the backing, and you're ready to sew this fringe into the seam allowance. It's kind of a fun application. Why don't you give it a try? Now I'd like to review some of our sewing techniques. As I've mentioned several times already, when making Halloween costumes, your children or grandkids may like to use these costumes for pretend. So keep that in mind in putting them on easy. We like to use hook and loop tape. It may be simple for some of you to put in, as for me, but also it's easy for the kids to get in and out of for a dress-up or playtime. And the chaps that we just finished with, instead of using ties at the back to tie in the chapped portions, we just use little elastic strips. So easy for the little cowboys to get these put over their pants. Also through the top, the pattern required just a casing so that the belt can slip through the top, making it easier for them to have pretend anytime they'd like. Today we had many different ideas for making Halloween costumes, but remember, these techniques can be used not only for Halloween costumes, but other garment sewing, like putting the fishing line around the edge of the skirt. We can use that for ruffles. So keep this in mind. Apply these techniques to other sewing. Bye for now. It's time to sew for Halloween again on Sewing with Nancy. We're sewing scary and we're sewing spooky costumes, but it's fun. Today, rather than working with a specific pattern or a specific design, I'm going to give you some ideas of how to create them from garments that you have at a home by adding appliques or making a cape. For example, you could start off with a ready-made sweatshirt, simple sweatshirt, but then add a spooky design of appliquing on a spider web and even making a detachable spider if you'd like. I'll be giving several different ideas for working with sweats or t-shirts and then adding these embellishments. It's an applique type of work, but I think you'll find it fun. We've made it fast and easy just for Halloween costumes. I'll also be giving you some ideas on making a mask and capes, as I mentioned earlier. I'm going to start with the applique idea and give you two options. I'll get set up at my table right now. First, I'm going to detail the no-fuss type of applique. Perfect for Halloween costumes because it's quick and very easy to do. Look for a design from a pattern or from an applique book or a coloring book or a children's storybook. This we've used from a pattern. And trace it onto a sheet of the transfer web that has the paper backing. Here we have the paper backing we've used so many times. You'll see that on one side it's paper, and you flip it to the other side and it's slightly shiny. That's where the web has been applied or fused into place. This makes for fast appliques. Place the design underneath the paper and cover it, and it's transparent enough that you should be able to see the details. If the design is rather light, try photocopying it first of all. It will darken it somewhat. And just outline the areas, both inner and outer areas. I'll show you in a little while why you need both the inner and outer areas. We'll be saving this paper so that I can stitch or paint in these designs as we go along. After you've traced the whole thing, then before cutting it out, fuse it to the back of the fabric. Notice that the webbing, or excuse me, the transfer web has been cut smaller, slightly smaller than the fabric. Otherwise, it will stick, the design will stick to your ironing board. Just by pressing this into place, following the manufacturer's directions for a few seconds, you'll find that it will adhere or bond. Now all we have to do is to cut out the design. And for Halloween, our appliques are usually quite large. They're not with a lot of detail or many pieces. So this is a way that makes it so fast and easy. When I'm not cutting on an angle, I can cut a little bit better. And here you can see just the design simply cut out. And this would be maybe an area that your kids could help you with as well. Now it's ready to be pressed into place, and all we have to do is separate this, just peeling off the paper backing. This has the bonding on it, ready to be pressed to your sweatshirt or t-shirt, but then keep this in mind or keep it aside, so we'll be using this for these guidelines in just a little bit. Now if you do not have this paper backing, the web with the paper backing, and you have the more traditional web or bonding web, I'll show you how to work with that as well. You can usually buy this, again, in your interfacing section of your fabric store by the yard. And it's totally webbed. It does not have the paper backing. But when working with this, we have to apply just a little bit of different techniques. You get out some scraps of fabric and a pressing sheet. This is not a normal pressing sheet that you'd use for tailoring. It's actually a type of a Teflon fabric. Again, it's mainly used for appliques. Place this on your ironing board and cut a layer of the transfer web slightly smaller than your fabric square, the applique area, and place it to the wrong side. And then meet, obviously, the web to the pressing sheet. This pressing sheet enables you to apply or fuse the web to the back of the fabric without it getting stuck to the iron. That's the whole key. This webbing works so well, but you have to make sure it will never make contact with the bottom of your iron, otherwise, as you know, you'll have a mess. We'll just peel this off, and you can see that it's already adhered or pressed into place, already bonded. Now we need to cut out the shape and look back to your stash of applique designs and pin this design to the top of the fabric and cut it out. And just cut following the design, and then you'll have an applique that will be just in the same position as the one we had before. So whatever way you'd like to work with it, just either use the webbing with a paper backing or the webbing and use an applique pressing sheet. Now for placing this onto your garment. Let me just show you one that we have in progress. Today, when we're working with these simple appliques for Halloween, we're going to be working from the background to the foreground. Notice we have the moon down first and then applied the bats. Now we could apply this third one if we wanted to, just placing it on in this area, or however you'd like. Again, this would be a great area if you're making this for your child to have him or her help you with this. Cover it with a traditional pressing cloth and press for 30 seconds. This is really important at this point that we press the recommended period of time, and it's 30 seconds to get a proper bonding. Now I'm going to just cheat a little bit, and I'll press it after we get off camera, but you can see then everything is bonded, ready to go. To put the finishing touches on this applique, I'll show you how to paint around the edges or to satin stitch at your sewing machine. A fast and fun way to finish an applique, especially for Halloween, is to embellish it with fabric paints. We like to store fabric paints inverted so that we don't have a lot of air bubbles when working with this. If you have them upside down, you will get little globs of paint that will come out. It's great to have your kids, if they're going to wear this sweatshirt, to help you decorate it and to actually do the painting. The first step I like to do is to actually try a little bit on a scrap of paper so that you can get the feel of how the paint comes out of here. If you apply nice, even pressure, as you might guess, that's the best way to work with it. We have a simple pumpkin design and have the inner designs drawn on here with the use of a tracing wheel or with a fabric marking pen or pencil. And the actual t-shirt fabric, or if you actually had a finished t-shirt or sweatshirt, would be placed over a piece of cardboard to make it easiest for you to do the drawing and also to let it dry. I'm right-handed, so I'm going to work from my left to my right. This way my sleeve is not going to draw the paint along. Keep that in mind for your kids too. And another thing to keep in mind is to work, as I mentioned earlier, from the background to the foreground. So on our little pumpkin, we're going to just do these inner lines first of all. They're the background. And this is a lot of fun. Makes sewing for Halloween and painting for Halloween very enjoyable. As I said, try to have your kids, if they're going to wear this, to be a part of doing this. After doing all the painting, then make sure that you let it dry overnight. And now I'll show you how to do the stitching. To set up your machine for applique, I'm going to give you the guidelines. I've done a whole series on working with appliques, so now you're just going to get the highlights for the fun, spooky types of appliques. Your machine is set up with a zigzag, a medium width for the outer edges and a narrow width for the inside detail. I'll show you that in a minute. For the thread, we're using a metallic, or you could use a lustrous rayon or cotton machine embroidery thread, so that the thread does not ravel for the fine type that we have here. Use a size 90 European needle or a size 14 American needle that has a larger hole or eye. We have the tension slightly loosened by 2 notches from a 5 to a 3 so that the zigzag is nice and even on the top. Behind the fabric we have a stabilizer that's temporary. You can tear this after you're done satin stitching away from the back, but this will prevent the top edges from puckering. If you remember when we were working with the transfer web that had the paper backing, I had you save that paper backing if it had lines marked, as we did in our little Halloween bat. First step would be to pin the paper to the top side of the applique and then satin stitch down the inner areas. Here we're using about a 1 zigzag width and a 0.5, a short stitch length. Notice that I satin stitched around the background first of all, around the moon, and now I'm going to do the bat area. Now we can tear away the paper and do the satin stitching around the edges. This is really handy so we get the markings just where we'd like it. I'm going to change the width of my zigzag to about 2.5. You can test it on your machine at home how you would like to do this, what width you'd like. And when satin stitching over an applique, I like to put a zig in the fabric, a zag off the edge, and just stitch around the edges. That's all there's to it. If you'd like to refer to our program on applique for details on turning corners, you might like to do that. But in this instance, we're just using very simple styles. And try to stop, if you can, with the needle in the fabric, which I'll stop here to the needle on the right side of the fabric. And I can pivot and turn around and do the rest of the outer edges of the bat. This just takes a little time, and I think it's a lot of fun. And I'll continue sewing this, and I'll come back. I'll show you some other ideas for Halloween. In this series, we're sewing scary, but we're sewing fun. And this time, we'll sew a mask. This mask is perfect for adults at your costume party or masquerade. It kind of combines some craft work as well as some sewing. I'll show you how to do this. We're going to make type of like a detachable applique, but with some shape. We're going to need 2 layers of fashion fabric, 2 layers of interfacing, very crisp, fusible interfacing, things that you would use maybe in the lapels of blazers or even some craft fusible. And then 1 layer of the fusible web. So we have 5 different layers needed for the mask. On the back of each fabric, we're going to fuse the applique. And we've worked with this many times before. Notice we have the eyes positioned on this so we can later cut those out. On one of the back pieces, this one I already have positioned or fused into place, on the back of the mask, we're going to apply a pipe cleaner. This pipe cleaner gave the mask some depth and could be shaped or moved into shape, pressed into shape. To put the pipe cleaner into place, we've simply used a hot glue gun to fuse it into place. And just press a little bit, and of course we've already done this, but just apply it and you'll be amazed how quickly that sticks. You can flatten it out or shape it to form the contour of your face. Then after having this into place, what we'll do is on the remaining side put on our transfer web. Press this on as we did with all the other appliques, get it pressed on. This will allow us to sandwich everything together. And after pressing, peel off the paper backing and the web is applied. A lot of pressing to make these types of Halloween costumes. And then we can simply press all layers together using a pressing cloth, and the mask has already started to take its shape. Let's refer to our finished mask. Not only can you make this for a bat, but think of a pumpkin or a cat would make perfect masks. And we have some edge finish around the mask. This could either be paint, or in this instance, I zigzagged over metallic yarn. Here's a close-up of just zigzagging along the very edge, zig in the fabric, zag off the edge with metallic ribbon on the fabric and thread in the sewing machine. To finish it, after you have the edges put together, then you can add a ruffle. This is kind of an optional thing, adding more of a feminine touch if you'd like. We gathered some organdy type fabric, crisp fabric, and then either sew it, or in this case we again use the glue gun just to position it into place. Let it dry. To use your mask, we just have a dowel glued into place, covered it with pipe cleaners, and added streamers. This is a fun and spooky Halloween mask to make. Halloween is a magical time of year. You can make pumpkins up here simply by sewing a detachable applique. This applique can be removed after Halloween. To make this specialty applique, we're going to use many of the same sandwiching techniques of putting layers of fabric together as we used for the mask. I'll just quickly review that. We have 2 layers of the outer fabric of the orange pumpkin cut and 2 layers of fusible fleece. This fleece has a fusible backing on one side and the regular fleece on the other side. The reason I chose to use the fleece is that it's loftier and gives the applique a little bit of greater dimension. Fuse this fleece to the back side of both of the pumpkins. We've cut just 1 layer of the transfer web so that we can fuse everything together. We're trying to make Halloween sewing a lot of fun and kind of fast, so we're going to fuse a lot of layers together. After we have all 5 layers pressed, it's time to do the stitching. As I mentioned, this is a lot like sewing the mask, because we have the 5 layers put together. But here we have a little change. Instead of just gluing the edges, because this is going to be detachable, I'm going to sew on a stabilizer, a temporary stabilizer that we can tear away later on. Here I'm stitching over the edges using a satin stitch. I've widened the width of the zigzag. Earlier we mentioned a rather narrow zigzag for an even look, but because I'm stitching over so many layers of fabric, I widened it to about a number 4 and number 5. Again, a satin stitch length of about 0.5 or 1. After sewing over the edges, then you can remove the stabilizer from the back, as well as stitch in the lines in the middle. Let me show you a close-up of our detachable applique, just to show you the finishing touches. You can see in the inside, we've just simply stitched with a narrower zigzag. The outer zigzag is wider. And now you can machine baste or tack this or pin it to your garment, and you're ready for Halloween. With sewing knowledge, you can turn simple sweats into super sweats with adding an applique and also making a cape. I'll show you how to make this cape. Capes are perfect Halloween accessories for a witch, a devil, king, queen, or magician, or Superman. A cape is a simple accessory and easy to make. For children, a 22-inch cape is perfect, and that's what we have here, made of 2 layers of fabric. You can make it single layer or double layer. The choice is up to you. I'd like to give you some guidelines on cutting this, because that's the most difficult part. Sewing it is very fast and fun. To make a simple cape for a child that's 22 inches long, you'll need to buy 5/8 of a yard of fabric. On this graphic, you can see that 5/8 of a yard of fabric is about 22 inches, about 22 and a half actually inches. And we have the fabric folded traditionally with the selvages meeting. We're going to make half circles or quarter circles on here, a 5-inch quarter circle at the neck, and then a 22-inch quarter circle the entire length of the cape. Here's how. On this fabric, again, we have the selvages, the fabric folded so the selvages are meeting, and at the cut edge of the fabric, where there's a fold and the selvages meet, we're placing the edge of the tape measure. On most tape measures, there is a opening at the end. Or if you didn't have it, you'd simply pin through the tape measure. And with chalk or with a marking pin, we'll put this together one more time, we'll find the 5-inch mark on the tape measure. And every so often, as you're moving the tape measure around, simply mark right on the fabric for your cutting line. Now mark a second quarter circle by moving to the end of the fabric, and then at every 22 inches, mark. We're working with a compass theory here, and that way we'll get nice even edges. And just move this all the way around and cut out your fabric. For our Superman costume, we use 2 layers, but you could just use 1 and serge or clean finish the edge. For an adult, if you'd like a 45-inch cape, which would come about to your knee, here the graphic shows exactly how much fabric to buy. It's 1 1/4 yards. You fold the fabric so that the cut edges are meeting, the opposite way of which we normally do for sewing. There at the neckline again is a 5-inch neckline opening and a 45-inch opening, or excuse me, 45-inch length quarter circle marked all the way around the perimeter. For a really long cape, for a regal king or a magician, for an adult that is, you may like a 60-inch cape. Buy 3 3/8 yards of 60-inch fabric. Again, you can see that you're folding so that the cut edges are meeting, with a 5-inch quarter circle at the neck and a 60-inch quarter circle around. Next, you can serge or sew the edges together. At the neckline, apply bias tape, tie around you, and you can wrap yourself up in a cape for a perfect Halloween costume. Today I give you ideas to make Halloween or masquerade costumes for both young and old. Whether you're a child or a child at heart, you could put on a simple applique with a Halloween motif and add painting around the edges using fabric paints. Terrific for your kids to help you do this, or grandkids. Remember to work on a cardboard backing and let this dry at least overnight. This I just finished and is still moist to the touch, but after tomorrow it'll be ready to finish and serge and wear. Now if you're going to be putting an edge around the applique that's stitched on by the sewing machine, remember to use a medium width zigzag or satin stitch. I used about a 2 to 2.5 around the moon, did that first, and then did the foreground pieces, the bats. The inner edges I did with it, or the inner design I did with a medium width and just slightly wider for the outer edges. Then when you're complete, I had a backing put on here. We just simply tear it away. I hope you've enjoyed this series on sewing for Halloween. Remember, you can sew scary, but so fun.
This educational videotape has been brought to you in part by FOF, simply the best European line of sewing machines. By Pellon, quality products by Freudenberg. By Ginger, a tradition of quality in scissors and shears. The McCall Pattern Company, the most fashionable name in contemporary home sewing patterns. And by Nancy's Notion Sewing Catalog, featuring specialty sewing books and notions.